Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. One of my viewers wanted my thoughts on Julia Clarice Brown. Now, your Julia Clarice Brown was a black woman who worked with the FBI as an informant and infiltrated the civil rights movement. And your Julia Clarice Brown thought that your Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist and worked behind the scenes hoping to try to find information on him so that the FBI could go out here and discredit him. Now, I'm going to play some footage of your Julia Clarice Brown that is in the public domain, and my use of this footage is under fair use of United States copyright law of 1976 as part of my commentary.
Well, I say it is frightening, and it should be frightened to the entire American people that he has demanded $10 billion. And if he doesn't get it, then there may be riots this summer. Martin Luther King is nothing but a blackmailer, and he should be arrested for blackmailing because he certainly has blackmailed the United States government.
There's one thing that bothers me, and that as a Negro yourself, why do you talk so bitterly against Martin Luther King and a lot of these other people of your race?
Well, let me tell you something. I don't put my race before I do my country. Being a Negro woman doesn't matter to me who is a Negro or who is a white person. If they are enemies of our country, then they are certainly my enemies too.
Now, your Julia Clarice Brown is a race traitor just like the late Dorothy Pittman Hughes. And just like the late Dorothy Pittman Hughes, your Julia Clarice Brown believes that she is an American and not a black American. And because she's drinking the integrationist Kool-Aid, she's out here thinking that by becoming an informant for the FBI, that she will go out here and gain favor by going out here to discredit the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, your Julia Clarice Brown was a FBI informant who was sent to infiltrate the civil rights movement, and her goal was to go out here and try to find information to go out here and associate the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with the Communist Party. And your Julia Clarice Brown went out here looking for this information for the FBI, and she went out here looking to try to find information to discredit Dr. King. However, once somebody does their research objectively, they will see that Dr. Martin Luther King had absolutely nothing to do with the Communist Party after he learned the truth about it. Now, yes, your Dr. Martin Luther King went out here and listened to the messages of communism early on in his campaigns before the civil rights movement, because he did go and study communism at Crozer Theological Seminary in 1949. However, as he got older, he spoke against communism because he said that your communism is fundamentally incompatible with the Most High God. And anybody who does their research on the Word of God understands that your communism is not compatible with the Word of God, because your communism says that there is no God. So it shows that your Julia Clarice Brown really, in her attempts to try to discredit Dr. King, basically prove many of Dr. King's points, because you cannot be a minister of the faith of Christianity by going out here and supporting communism, because your communism is diametrically opposed to the teachings of the Messiah and the Most High. the teachings of the Messiah and the Most High go out here and go against everything in communism, which first tenet is that there is no God and that men are on their own. So your Julia Clarice Brown, she's sitting there trying to connect Dr. King to this ideology that he basically had disagreed with early on in his campaigns of civil rights. But that didn't stop your Julia Clarice Brown, who basically was one of these bootlicks who was caught up in her feelings about Dr. King having all of this prominence and power, and because she was jealous of your Dr. King having this prominence and position of power, this is what led to her looking to go out on this campaign to discredit him. Now, your Julia Clarice Brown, as I see it, is basically another one of these black female race traitors, and this black female race traitor basically wanted to go out here and turn on the race, believing that, oh, if I stand with the FBI and I stand with America, America will stand with me because I'm standing against the communists, not understanding that your FBI and your communists are two sides of the exact same coin and two wings on the same dirty bird, because your communist and your capitalist are both white supremacists, and in the eyes of both of these white supremacists, they see a black person as inferior, and because they see a black person as inferior, what they want to do is be able to destroy any sort of opposition, because when it comes down to both the communist and the capitalist white supremacist, they both see black people as nothing more than tools for them to go out here and use as related to maintaining their caste system, because what they both want to do is see black people as part of a permanent underclass. And again, this also contradicts what the communist goes out here and says as related to, oh, everybody is equal. Oh, everybody is equal until the black man goes out here and demands his fair compensation. That's when the black man is no longer equal, because again, in the system of white supremacy, the white man is supposed to be on top, and that is the thing that flew over the head of your Julia Clarice Brown as she was out here looking to go out here and try to pander to your white supremacists, hoping to go out here and get information to discredit the late Dr. Martin Luther King and destroy all of the efforts as related to the civil rights movement. Now, your Julia Clarice Brown wanted us to believe, oh, that the civil rights movement was about communism, and again, she got it all wrong there. No, the civil rights movement was never about communism. It was about foundational black Americans getting their equal rights as related to the United States Constitution that were guaranteed to them with the 13th and 14th Amendments of that Constitution. And it was also about foundational black Americans getting their fair and just compensation from these services that they paid for as related to municipal services such as public schools, public roads, and libraries and sewers and other institutions and public works that foundational black Americans wound up paying for. Because while your foundational black Americans were paying for these services, we were getting treated like second-class citizens under segregation. And under segregation, many of these blue party types were out here taking the tax dollars of foundational black Americans and not giving them anything tangible in return as related to services for public schools, public housing, and other services that they were supposed to get as related to the taxes they paid when they had their black-owned businesses. But that flew over the head of your Julia Clarice Brown, who was again in her feelings about Dr. King, wanted to go out here and try to get brownie points with your white supremacists, believing that the white supremacists were trying to stamp out communism, not understanding that, again, both sides are all under the institution of white supremacy, and because they are under the institution of white supremacy, they are all about promoting anti-black racism, because anti-black racism is how these institutions and ideologies go out here and operate, because as long as they keep the black man and black woman at the bottom of the world, these white supremacists can have their smooth world. And sadly, your Julia Clarice Brown was not a critical thinker. No, she was caught up in her feelings about trying to get some high status with the white supremacists. And again, she was nothing more than a modern day mammy. And this modern day mammy, all she wanted to do was buck dance for some bread and crumbs from the master's table, and she hoped by throwing Dr. Martin Luther King under the bus, she would be able to go out here and be able to rise to a prominent position inside of the system of white supremacy. That is what many of these informants wanted to do, as related to their informing on many civil rights leaders like the late Dr. King, the late Malcolm X, the late Medgar Evers, and many others out here. What these individuals wanted to go out here and do was go out here hoping that they could find some information to go out here and use against our great civil rights leaders like your Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, I have my disagreements about Dr. King as related to integration and in the mid 60s. However, as your Dr. King was going out here and looking at things critically, he realized he was walking into his master's burning house with integration, and that's when they went out here and found women like your Julia Clarice Brown to go out here and look to speak against him. Because as Dr. King changed his perspective in the late 60s and was starting to talk about the tangible of reparations, that's when your white supremacists wanted to go out here and recruit people like your Julia Clarice Brown to go out here and speak against him. That what they wanted to do was go out here and use your Julia Clarice Brown as a tool to be a so-called counterpoint. But what this bootlick was looking to do was go out here and present the idea that your Dr. King was anti-American, when in actuality these individuals were anti-black. And as these individuals were playing both sides, what they were looking to do is go out here and take advantage of your Julia Clarice Brown's emotions and her ignorance and weaponize her to go out here in an effort to make Dr. King look like he was the bad guy for asking for the $10 billion of reparations. He wasn't really asking, he was demanding the $10 billion in reparations to compensate foundational black Americans for slavery, for Jim Crow, and for the current and ongoing discrimination, anti-black discrimination that goes on. That's what Dr. King was fighting for. But just like today, we've got all of these bootlicks looking to speak against your reparations. We had your Julia Clarice Brown back then looking to speak against your reparations, and not understanding that those reparations are entitled to foundational black Americans who have been denied an opportunity at getting the American dream. Because your white GI soldiers, they were given an opportunity at the American dream, and before them, you had many white immigrants who were given an opportunity at the American dream as they immigrated to this country. And even before them, you had many white settlers in the territories who were given free land that was taken from Native Americans. And they don't want to talk about that. And again, your people like your Julia Clarice Brown, they want to just make black people the bad guy when we're not the bad guy. As slaves in this country, we were denied our freedom. And then once we did get our freedom, what happened was we had your terrorists from the Ku Klux Klan look to try to destroy everything we built by burning down our towns like Rosewood and Black Wall Street, killing many of our black businessmen in lynchings, or having many of our black business people put in jail. No, we never got an opportunity to compete because your white supremacists feared black competition would overtake them, and they feared that if black people became the competitors and overtook them, they would go out here and look to subjugate whites and put them in a second class status like they did foundational black Americans. And it was all of these efforts by white supremacists to undermine the black economy that has it in poverty, even though black people have $3.3 trillion in spending power in cash and credit. And if black people were allowed to have their own economy without the interference of white supremacy, our economy would be the second largest economy in the world, supplanting China and Japan. That is something many black people don't know, and they really don't know about traitors like your Julia Clarice Brown, who went out here and actively looked to undermine Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. just a few months before he was assassinated. Your Julia Clarice Brown was put on television to try to discredit Dr. King, and she was put on the air again, basically again, to go out here and be the mouthpiece of white supremacy. And so while she talked about, Dr. King and the communists, she couldn't really see the big picture. And because she couldn't see the big picture, she couldn't see that, hey, both sides of white supremacy are out here, and it doesn't matter about their political position or their political ideology or their economic ideology. White supremacy is anti-black no matter where you go, because those Russians were just as racist and white supremacist as the white Americans out here. And again, both of them all had the position that they believed being anti-black was more important than anything, because they needed blacks to be the scapegoats. They needed blacks to be the bottom of the world in order for them to have their smooth world where they could have no problems and obstacles. They needed to have somebody to blame so that they would not have to take responsibility for their own failures. And this is what, again, flew over the head of your Julia Clarice Brown, who was sitting up here talking about Dr. King was a communist. The first thing of misinformation, because while he did study the ideology when he was at the Crozer Theological Seminary, he did reject all of those tenets because he understood your guys like your Karl Marx, the original Pookie, was nothing more than a white supremacist. And this Karl Marx, again, he was one of the biggest racists who went out here and made anti-black statements. So your Dr. King could not ethically go out here and stand behind the tenets of communism, because if you study the history of communism, you would understand that your communist is one of the biggest racist and white supremacists in the room. But he'll have you thinking, it's all about everybody getting their fair share. However, when it's time to give the black man his fair share, he wants to make the black man a slave, the same way that American white supremacists want to keep black people in bondage in a second-class status. And again, your Dr. King walked away from communism because he said it robs man of the quality what makes him a man, which is being a child of God, because God, as children of God, we are a part of the inheritance given to us by the Messiah, who adopted us as sons. And what your communism says is that there is no God, and that's why anybody who is serving the Most High would walk away from communism. But your Julia Clarice Brown, she deified and worshipped the white man, and because she deified and worshipped the white man, she could not see how her God had forsaken her and how her God basically was using her as a tool to keep men from being able to do God's work that were a part of the civil rights movement. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can send a donation to the Cash App, and if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, and books like A Recipe for Success and The Thetas and Eternal Night, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find these books at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks in a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business at paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.